Good afternoon and welcome to Tata Literature Live Business Shastras. I am Reena Agrawal from Literature Live. Our book in focus for this afternoon's edition of Business Shastras is a celebration of every woman's life who is straddling work, home and career. And what better day than today, International Women's Day, to talk about it. Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya, Chairperson and CEO of Salesforce India, and we say it with a lot of force, ma'am, is the author of Indomitable, a working woman's notes on work, life, and leadership. Ma'am will be in conversation with Shinjini Kumar, co-founder of Salt, My Salt app. Before I invite Shinjini to take this afternoon forward, may I remind all of you to send in your questions for the Q&A segment at the end of the session. 5 questions win Tata Click vouchers, so bring them on. Thank you, and over to you, Shinjini. We look forward to a very lovely and engaging conversation. Take over.
Thank you, Reena, and welcome, ma'am. I've been so excited about this. It's very rare for me to be this excited. And we just discussed there's some construction work going on, so there may be a little noise, so I'll be shouting on top of it. But that doesn't deter my enthusiasm at all. I'm going to start by just asking you a very simple question. What does it feel like now to be an author in addition to everything else that you are?
Well, first and foremost, it's having the honor of getting invited to lit fests like this one. So that definitely is a very big high. My background was English literature and I was a bookworm even as a child. And my mother used to keep asking me that you're reading enough, how about, getting something written? And it's been sort of at the back of my mind for a very long time. And to ultimately have got a book and got it published, well, it does give you a high. And to be acknowledged as a, author, as you say, I never really thought of myself as an author, to tell you the truth. That is something that is definitely, it is something which is very precious, I should say, to me.
It is very precious to us as well, because many of us who actually did not come from the standard background into banking. So I have to tell you, I share the English literature background with you, also the Jharkhand and many other things. Both our husbands are professors. So it's a very interesting thing that we, so for us, I think the fact that you wrote this book is very encouraging from all the very different perspectives, from leadership, from actually being that person who can change things, and also somebody who can do it differently, right? So because many of us struggle with that. And I'll come back to that theme when I come to questions leading to International Women's Day and what it means to be a woman. But before that, I first want to exhaust my questions on what it means to be an author. So just tell us a little bit more about the process of writing. Like you say on the cover itself, and I just want to show people who haven't seen the book and not bought it yet, please do go and buy. This is how this beautiful book is, very well produced. And you say notes, a working woman's notes on life, work, and leadership. So were you taking notes even before? Because there are such details in the book that it kind of astonished me. So tell me about the process. Once you got started, how did you go about this?
Actually speaking, I write this in the foreword also. The book's really sort of wrote itself. In fact, the only notes I would have, or at least, kind of help that I sought from colleagues was just for the last portion, which is the chairman's portion. The one that you live yourself, you don't need notes. You have all the mental notes that you need in order to sort of relate those incidents because they are so real and you are reliving them while you're writing them. You don't really need notes. Where you do need notes is where you are directing operations from the back and people are actually on the ground executing them. That is where you need to get their feedback and their stories and their difficulties, because you are not absolutely hands-on there, and to that extent there is a gap between the way you want to portray it and what you actually know about the entire circumstance. For that matter, things like demonetization, etc., where I was actually on the ground, I needed no help from anybody. But other things like improvement of customer service, the people who were doing it on the ground were a different team. So I did consult with them and and talk to them as to what they felt at that point of time, what were the stories that they could share with me. But other than that, the first two portions of the book, that is my childhood and secondly growing up till the time that I became chairman, no notes, nothing that was written down, everything, in my mind.
I read the book actually quite thoroughly because I was writing a review of it, and then I got this chance to have this conversation with you. So I was actually very struck. There are many books in this book. Like your motherhood experience itself is a book by itself. Even your marriage and you're going to the US and coming back and straddling different homes and different relationships is a book by itself. Your childhood is a book by itself, and of course your career is a book by itself. And then I was trying to think that there's so many of these books into this book, but for me, my favorite was your childhood book. So I'm still intrigued. Like, you do have an author's mind because and you became a banker, and I think because you take note of things that writers do. Like, even in a situation where you talk about your branch being flooded, or a robbery happening, or somebody creating a ruckus outside, your attention to that fine little detail, and the fact that it stayed with you all these years for you to be able to rack it from that part of your brain and recall it and write it so well and beautifully, it does tell me that there are more books in you. So are there more books in you?
Well, I would definitely like to write more if I can. And by the way, Shinjini, I must compliment you on that review. It's the most beautiful one that I have read. And in fact, just today morning, I was reading the review written by Tata Venkatesh. And she basically believes that, the first 3 chapters should have been left out. It should be more, regarding my journey in SBI. But I really don't think so, because, I think it was my childhood that shaped me. And I didn't want to leave out those influences. In fact, I had told the publishers that let's make the Chairman's Stint a separate book. But they wouldn't agree. They said, no, it is because of that people are going to read that book. So it has to be all inside. And believe me, writing the book was not so difficult. What was difficult is in leaving out portions of it. There are so many stories I had to cut out because, I needed to sort of adhere to the numbers that they were giving me. They wanted 90,000 words. Ultimately, it ran to about 114,000. I couldn't compress it beyond that, and they had to sort of take it or leave it kind of thing. So yes, I think there are a number of things over there which I could have written in further detail. You do make compromises. But going forward, yes, I would like to write more. I do believe that there are things that I can write about, and there are things that I believe in passionately that I would like to write about. In fact, with my existing colleagues, I keep telling them that the moment I retire, I'm going to write a book on busting the public sector and the private sector myths. Yeah. Now, having worked in both sectors, there are loads and loads of myths around both. Okay.
Yes.
Having seen both now from a very close quarters, I think there's much that can be written about that in order to disabuse people of what they think the public sector is like or the private sector is like. Yes, there are other things that I would like, but most of all, I would like to really write a work of fiction and still be successful at it, because I think this one is really my own lived experience. So writing it was not that difficult. But writing something that is entirely creative from your own mind, that I think is, super, achievement. And if I can do that, probably, I would feel extremely satisfied with myself.
So I'll actually look forward to interviewing you when you have written your work of fiction, because I'm pretty sure you'll do that. And like I was telling you, we share a lot of things in common. And one of the things also is that I actually do write fiction. I don't write as much as I should, but I do manage to write. And the reason I found your book, the first parts of the book, very, very interesting is because I didn't start out by reading it as looking for insights into, SBI or leadership or the Raghuram Rajan years. And all of those are questions that I also have in my mind because, those are the things that I have lived through, right? But for me, the later part of the book felt like it was notes, it was crunched, it was, and as you said also, right, because you were talking to your colleagues, you were putting things down. And to me, that felt like notes. But the first part of the book actually felt like a book. That's not the book that a typical bank chairman would actually write, right? So that's why I was actually struck by the book and went along to read it. So I'll tell you one thing that really struck me is how you sketch characters that are peripheral. So central characters, yes, you sketch them well, which I think many people, if they have good language, will end up doing. But what I was struck by was the peripheral characters, like that small somebody's wife that comes in just for one night to take care of Sukrita, or something very peripheral, but then you are able to really remember that, and you are able to make that thing come alive, that person come alive, that moment come alive, that some color on the wall, some that thing is what I think is the author in you. And I really will wait for you to write that, because some parts of your childhood in particular were really well described. So, and I know the frustration of people putting that labels. I'm going to come straight to that question, because that's a question that I think a lot of women struggle with. I have struggled with it, and that is it is so important for people to label you, to accept you, and to put you into a position, right? So you are the SBI chairman, and if that label is not like fitting, then it's uncomfortable. So for me, I've had that same problem, right? Like you laugh too much, you're too flippant, you're like I was a central banker, right? I was in RBI for 17 years, and the only reason I got out of it is because I was just tired of being that serious person. I don't want to be that person. And again, that public sector, private sector thing, I realized that it doesn't go away. That idea of the label, which I thought was because I was in RBI, wasn't because I was in RBI. It is because of other reasons, one of them being patriarchy, and there being fewer women, and therefore the stereotype of a woman is not there. The stereotype of a woman leader is there, which has been created by other people. So very long question, but I want you to give us a very long answer on this whole idea of living to the label versus breaking that label.
Well, one of the things, of course, some of the people, some of my friends who read the book, who talked to me about was, how could you sort of write about your, childhood, etc., in the way that you did? Means these are very personal details. So why did you share those? Means you are a public person, you have a public persona, and why did you go about doing this? And I've thought about it, and what I really want to do is to bring forth the character, not as Arundhati Bhattacharya, but as what any woman would go through in their journey. I just happen to be, maybe a little more lucky than some, and got a few more labels that sort of set my space. But there are loads and loads of women who are actually living these journeys, and they get no voice. I have always been a very strong proponent of the fact that, I may have a voice that people listen to because of the position that I have been able to attain. But for every one of us that has a voice, there are 10,000 others whose stories remain untold, who don't have a voice. So, it's important for us to make that known. It's important for us to put that down, to explain, or to rather make sure that people who are around us, the ecosystem, starts empathizing with what we go through as we go through life and as we go through various milestones. And that will never happen unless these stories get told. So while I was sharing, I was trying to be as honest as possible. Like, Mr. Subrata Bagchi, who's also a noted author as well as a IT professional and an entrepreneur, he told me that your book actually sounds like fiction. And I said, but believe me, every single one of those things that I have written is non-fiction. So he said, okay, then I will write that you have raised non-fiction to the level of fiction. So I said, you're most welcome. That's something that I'd really like to do. So it's a great, actually, for me, it's a great accolade if you write that. And that's exactly what was done, means what he wrote. And I would again say that if you ask me, it's basically a woman's story in emerging India, because, it's in the backdrop of India that was still emerging, had very few opportunities, and, a lot of beliefs about what women should be like, what they should do, what their roles are, a lot of biases about, what a particular woman can actually achieve or can actually do. And, things like, for instance, even for me, I have often wondered whether my principal, when he suggested to my father that I study literature, whether he did it because I was a woman or because he really felt that I could write. And this book was actually, trying to vindicate that his choice was not a choice for gender. It was a choice because he really saw some possibilities in me. So I really don't know. I don't know these things. And these are questions I keep asking myself. Because actually speaking, I was quite good in the sciences. I had a seat in the medical college. I couldn't take it for different reasons. But, when you look at your life in retrospect, you begin to wonder whether the choices you made were right. The choice, for instance, that I made about sending my daughter back when I was abroad. That's a choice that haunts me still. I don't know whether I did the right thing or the wrong thing. And I don't think I'll ever know. Okay. But having made it, I had to take responsibility for it. I had to live with it. And that's something that I wanted to share with people, that, you make hard choices. Sometimes they may be the wrong choice. Sometimes they may be the right choice. Sometimes you may not know whether it was the right or the wrong choice. But still, you live with the consequences of whatever you decide on. So, it was more a kind of I would say it's a cathartic experience for me. And actually speaking, the book probably would never have got written other than the pandemic. Because during the pandemic, I had just taken on a new role in a new company, in a new industry. And the entire thing was virtual. I mean, something that I had never thought would be an added kind of a, handicap to what I was trying to do. And the Saturdays and Sundays were, you had it to yourself. For a change, you were not going out, you were not meeting friends, there was no spa, there was no hair treatment, nothing. And you still needed to relax, you still needed to do something different. And here was this book, which I had started immediately after my retirement, never had the time to finish. So just then, by the way, HarperCollins called and said, why don't you write a book? And I thought it seems to be a signal that this is something I could do. And so over the weekends, the book got written. And as I said, it was for me, particularly, I think it was a little bit of a cathartic experience as well. You're on mute.
So, yeah. There's something that all of us really love about you, which is a sense of, which is authenticity. And I think now there is a lot of talk about authenticity as a leadership virtue. In fact, there are classes to teach you authenticity, which I find very ironic and somewhat convoluted, but it is something that is there. But with you, I think that that authenticity is there. It's authentic, and so when you talk about whether it is your childhood and tracing the influences to make you who you become, there's always path dependency in life, everybody's life, right? You are born in a certain place, you are raised in a certain way, things happen to you, you don't choose everything. So there's a part of your book where you begin to choose, right? Because you're put in a situation of choice. So you talk about sending Sukrita home, or you talk about, accepting that transfer to Lucknow or going to Bangalore, or all the various choices that you make about schools. And one believes that those are one's choices, and therefore you look at it differently. But then there are a lot of things that are not your choosing, right? Like you studying English literature or something like that. So what I wanted to understand is from the tone of your book, though, at least I got this impression that you are somebody who will take what you got and you will focus on that and take it ahead. And on that spur of that moment, you will not stop by to actually do the A/B analysis and, have a framework of decision making to that is the impression that I get. I'm really curious to ask you that question, because I find that a lot of women that ask these questions, and I'm already getting these questions, and I'll come to you and ask you those questions. And when I speak, I get these questions as well. And a lot of these questions have to do with a very deliberate sense of how can I make my life better or less difficult or whatever. Focusing more on the present than on the future. And I wanted to ask you, how has it, because it has obviously worked very, very well for you, but it must have been very, very difficult. Like those ideas of saying, yes, I'll go to Bangalore, but then going there and, finding, or coming to Bombay, not finding the right school. And I know what that struggle feels like. I've been through that myself. And in your case, it was even more difficult. But then when you beat yourself up, when you say, oh, why did I do this? What do you tell yourself? How do you then keep moving ahead is what I wanted to ask for a lot of women, because that happens a lot.
Yeah, there is one saying that I really relate to, and that is, when life hands you a lemon, make a lemonade. I really and truly believe that. Okay. Because, for instance, I'll tell you, when I was posted into the new business department, I was just 1 month away from a CGM's interview, and I thought I was doing well in Lucknow, and I didn't know why I was getting moved out. And believe me, these promotions, being in an operational assignment, that is, being in charge of a circle or a part of a circle, is always considered as proof that you can do those frontline assignments. So taking me out from a field assignment a month before the interviews, and that too putting me in charge of an emerging business, which, by the way, there had not been many emerging businesses since Mr. Bhatt had been the chairman, and in fact even before that. So to that extent, it was the general opinion of all my peer group colleagues that I was getting buried. So it was a clear signal to tell me that this is the end of your career, you're not going further. Now, I could have taken that in many ways. And in fact, after I joined, my boss at that point of time called me and said, you should not be expecting a promotion, and you should just try and work as well as you can in this, and maybe next year you'll make it. So I knew, that at least he was not going to recommend me. So for a day, I took pause, and I didn't know whether I should prepare for it, I shouldn't prepare for it. And I talked to my husband, as I've written in my book, and he said that, look, if you don't prepare for it and you don't get it, you will always question whether it's because you didn't do something right. Prepare for it. If you don't get it, you don't get it. How does it make a difference? You need not get every single promotion that comes your way. And in fact, the fact that you've got all of them till now, it's itself a great thing. So, what prevents you from preparing for it? Well, I did get that promotion, and I became CGM of new businesses. So instead of one business, I actually set up 4. And believe me, though that department was considered to be the burial ground of many, it was one of the most productive times of my life. I have never had such a fantastic ride. From within a public sector bank, setting up 4 businesses, new businesses, is not easy. And there was no given playbook. Each one of them had to be dealt with separately. I met with so many regulators, learned to handle lawyers, law firms, learned to handle joint venture partners, did 3 joint venture agreements all in the space of 1 year, 8 months, launched 2 IT platforms, again, which I was not familiar with at that point of time. So, it was one of the most productive times that I ever had in my career. And therefore, I often tell people that, and probably my reputation was made at that point of time, that this is a person who can be relied on to do many things and new things.
Yes.
And so therefore, it's wrong to sort of take something that has come your way and trash it. Instead, if you try and make the best out of that situation, it's the best that you can do. Again, as I said, some may work, some may not. When I had my child, for instance, it took a long time for me to accept that she had challenges. Long time. I still don't know whether I have completely internalized that, and I'm totally supportive of it. But it took a long time. But the fact of the matter is, these are things that are handed over by fate to you. There is nothing much you can do about it. You can only make the best of that situation and try to, ensure that, you're doing the right thing by everybody. And that's what I sort of want to reflect in that book, that don't get disheartened because there seems to be a roadblock. The roadblock is there in order to test you and to make you stronger and to make you more productive. Take it in that spirit and then move on with it, because That's what life is all about, whether you like it or not, life will move on without you. So just go along with it instead of, sort of resisting it. And I've also felt that, you should be like a river. If you find a cliff coming in between and you can't burrow under it nor break through it, flow around it. There are ways in which you can flow around it, and you have to.
Did you go on mute or? Yeah, we just lost you for a second.
So you have to go with the flow.
Yes,
and while
yes.
you're going with the flow, you need to try and do the best you can under the circumstances. And again, as I said, keep your fingers crossed that it's all working out for the best.
And that's exactly why I thought your going back into your childhood was an important part of the book, because, and I wrote exactly this. I wrote about this river analogy when I was thinking about the book, because it's the language, but it's also the attitude. It's the way you just go with the flow and you find a way to go around something and keep moving ahead. I think that's a very important message for a lot of people that struggle because they're different, because they don't have the standard, like, particularly with our generation. I think you talked about your daughter, but there has been this great desire in a lot of middle class Indians to ensure a very standard career path for their children, and that somehow became the dominant career path, without realizing that even today, 8-9% Indians are the ones that speak English, that have access to that particular path. And a large majority of Indians who are living day to day and doing great work don't come from that linear standardized path, and therefore these stories are important, and therefore they need to be told. And one thing that and I'm going to just ask you this: you talk about your sister, and there was that episode of where she is sent to a boarding school thinking it's the best thing for her, and that doesn't work out so well. You are also sent to a boarding college against your wish of doing medicine and doing literature for different circumstances, but that works out very well for you. And again, like, that's the individual versus the environment, right? Like, what made you like? And that's where I would think that sharing something like that, would you think of cutting it out? Like, how did you think about these things? Was it deliberate? Were you trying to reflect on your journey, or was it storytelling and characters just kept coming to your mind and you kept describing the journeys? Like, how was that?
Well, it was not a comparison really, because I think what happened with my sister happened at too young an age. She was not mature enough to take this, whereas, I was far more adventurous. And I was actually excited about hostel. I was really and truly excited about it. In fact, very strangely, I used to look forward to returning to the hostel. To being with friends, to doing all kinds of, playing the pranks, doing all kinds of things on your own, trying to take our decisions. In fact, I used to find it harder and harder as I grew old to leave my parents behind whenever I was visiting them. I wasn't so conscious of it when I was going to college. In fact, I was highly excited about going to college. And even today, I recommend to a lot of my friends and colleagues that college should be hostel, because that's where you learn to actually take decisions on your own, to mature. However, school is a different matter. I think during school, you need the security of your parents around you. You need the companionship of your family, to really root you into what you are. So I think, maybe that is a decision that I would never take, of sending a child to a hostel during school years, because I found, at least in respect of my sister, that it didn't work at all. She really and truly felt that she was being discriminated against, because, she had been a very, very cosseted child till my brother came along. And my brother, because he had these physical issues, he really became the center of attention. And in a way, I enjoyed it, because, I was left to my own devices to do what I liked. And I like that, that's my nature. I like to do things on my own. I like to discover stuff on my own. I like to curl up in a corner with a book so that nobody discovers me. And to that extent, I was given that freedom to grow up sort of on my own, so to speak, not very strictly supervised. So I was fine with that.
You're the middle child, right?
I'm the last. I'm the youngest.
Okay. But your brother, because he had this challenge, he was treated with more like the youngest. Yeah.
there was a slight bias because he was the son also.
Yeah.
Not ruling that out, though my brother would very strongly oppose that because he always felt that my father sided with me. But whatever it is, but the fact of the matter is, what I was trying to sort of show is different people need different treatments. One, even as a parent, you need to understand that all of these individuals are different. They need to be handled in different ways. If by chance you get it right, you have a child that does great. If by chance you get it wrong, then it doesn't really work out well. I really believe that my sister would have done far better had she stayed with us and she had been able to pursue her interests. And I'm not blaming anybody. In those circumstances,
Yeah.
we would have taken the same decision. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't turn out to be the right decision at that point. At that point, she was too young to understand why, and too young to appreciate that it was for her own good. And that's not a way in which you should treat a child. The child should go only when the child is ready for it, excited about it, wants to experience it. That's the time to let go the child.
Fair. I'm getting a lot of questions, and I will have to spend a lot of time asking you those questions, but I'll first be done with my own. So I have this very interesting thing that runs through your book, which has to do with destiny or a sense of something bigger, someone bigger than you taking charge of things, which I found very interesting because personally, I'm not a religious person, but I have a similar belief that the bigger things are not something that you determine. The smaller things is what you determine. The bigger things are determined by something else. So you talk about, and especially that incident that you describe very vividly about that standing in front of the SBI office after your exam and then thinking about it. Just tell us, I don't know if people have read the book, but if you could even just tell us about that. And I don't know if we have time to maybe read a little bit of that, but or any part of the book. But if you can just tell us at least that episode, I think it was a very interesting one.
Yes, so this is because I had determined that at the age of 21 I would be independent, and my father was an employee of SAIL where the retirement age was 58 and there was no pension. And I knew that being the last child, he would need to support me, and I didn't want that beyond the age of 21. So I had set myself a limit. And at that point of time, I was actually supporting myself by doing tuitions, though my father still insisted that he pay a little bit of the expenses. He didn't need to, but he still insisted on it. Because he felt it was his responsibility till I had at least completed my post-graduation. But I was more or less earning enough to sort of look after myself. And I knew a tuition wasn't the right answer, and I wanted something which would lead to a career. And therefore, as I stood after doing the tuitions in the evening in Alipur of those days were houses with very high boundary walls. You couldn't look inside. There were very few people out on the streets. And this particular bus stop that I would take the bus from was right opposite SBI branch. And, I would often look at people leaving that branch. They would leave in groups. They'd be laughing and talking. Some of them would stand at the fruit stall and buy some fruit. Some of them would stand at the jhalmuri stall, again, very famous in Calcutta, and buy the murmura, the jhalmuri as we call it. And then, they would be eating and talking and laughing, and then they would be going their way. And I used to think it would be nice to be part of this community. They seem to be quite happy about what they are doing. And it would be lovely if I could get in there. At that point of time, I had applied for the role. The examination hadn't taken place. And of course, in those days, there were no guides or there were no classes that you needed, coaching classes. You had to do it on your own. And so I was standing in front of that branch one of those days. It was a winter evening, I remember. Our examinations were in September or November, I think. The exams were in November. So it was more or less pre-winter evening, a little smoggy. And then, this road also led to one of the largest crematoriums in Calcutta called Kyorakala. So there was this, procession carrying a body that was passing me by. And in front of me, just when they reached in front of me, one of these fellows, the cloth on his shoulder, it fell off. So they lowered the bier in front of me, and I could get the smell of all the incense sticks, etc., that were there. And in my mind, I sort of, wish the person peace for, you do that whenever you see a dead body. And then over a period of time, they again lifted the bar and they moved away. And then the bus came and I came back to the hostel. And that was just a week or so before our entrance examinations. And there was another girl in my room. We were in a 3-seater room who was also appearing for the exams. So we were sort of studying together. And our signal to go to bed was a 3 o'clock train that used to pass us. So when the 3 o'clock train would go past, we would dive into our beds knowing that we had to catch a few hours of sleep because you'd have to be up by 7 at least to make your classes on time. We were studying and this 3 o'clock train passed. And as it passed, my friend Shubhra, she said, I'll just go to the toilet, freshen up and then go to bed. And I said, I've, brushed my teeth and everything and I'm ready. So you go ahead. And then, I went to my bed and I was lowering the mosquito net. We had to have nets in those places. I was lowering the net and somehow suddenly, I got a very strong smell, the same incense smell that I had got when I was standing in front of the bar, And I was amazed and I was wondering whether it is whether there was something, wrong with me in the sense that it was my mind playing tricks. So I went to the third girl who was already sleeping. I woke her up and I told her, can you smell something? And she was half asleep and she said, yeah, somebody must be doing puja. And she went back to bed. Okay, so I thought, yeah, she's also smelt it. I've also smelt it. What on earth is it? And by the way, this other colleague who's studying with me, Shubhra, she's hugely scared of ghosts, hugely. So I didn't want to mention it to her, just scaring her. But, somehow it felt like a very benign presence. I don't know how to explain it. I don't believe in these things myself, but it was like a very benign presence. And again, I sort of, did my, prayed for it. And then I went to bed. And that was it. And of course, the strange thing was that when my posting got declared after I had completed my assignment, my training rather, not assignment, my training with SBI, the posting that I got was the very same branch. So it was Alipur branch that was my first posting. And that was like a real coincidence for me. Means that was the branch in front of which I had wished so hard. And that was the branch I get. Of course, the experience in the branch is another level altogether. Nothing like what I had imagined. But, having got that same branch, I was wondering, whether these things happen. But, there have been so many occasions when I have found that somehow or the other things come together and whatever problem I'm facing, that gets resolved. So I've been on the verge of a cliff many, many times. And I've often felt somebody pulling me back from the verge. And because of that, again, I'm not a very religious person, by the way. Both my parents lost their parents very early in life. So there were not a lot of religious observances in my house. I still don't know how to do a proper puja and, it's not something that I do regularly. I don't fast. Even if I try to fast, I forget and I have everything. So, after that, I feel even more guilty. So I've stopped keeping any fasts altogether. So I don't do any of those things. But I have a very strong belief that there is a power that looks out for us. And it does what it needs to do to keep you safe. And especially, if you mean no harm to anybody, if you try and help others whenever you can, there is this power that definitely, sort of guides your steps and make you take the right fork of the road and then, pulls you back when you are in an emergency. And it could be a very small emergency also. But there are quite a number of them. And in fact, I've been wondering whether I should write about the miracles in my life, because there have been those, they're simple, common, ordinary things. But if you look at it, they're still miracles.
Yeah, and they kind of flow through the book in a very subtle way. It's not very well described or anything, but you can see that guardian angel, that idea of, that connection that exists. And I think that makes your journey very layered in a way. Like it's not, and all journeys are layered. I think it's a false belief that we sometimes live in, where we want to give everything a rational explanation and sort of take ownership of that by making it sound very rational. I studied and therefore I qualified. No, there was somebody else who was studying much harder, was probably even smarter, but it didn't happen. So I think there is a little bit of humility that you get in life if you begin to ascribe that, and that comes across very well in the book as well. I want you to talk about your other guardian angel. I think Prithimo in the book comes across as a guardian angel like a lot, and he gives you the wise counsel. He takes on roles that are complementary to you. He's able to do a lot of that. And I know, like, including my own husband, I also know many other men who do that, and who are it's not a favor. They're just sensible people, and it's good to find sensible people. But I want you to talk about that a little bit, because every woman always wonders that if you are very successful, you must have a very, very supportive husband. And how important is it? Like, how much of it is you and how much of it is him? Like, I always tell people that if he cooked the first time and made a mess in the kitchen, and you went and told him you never cook again, it's your fault. Just let him make a mess and let him do it again until he learns.
He's been very supportive. For instance, when I just got married, I told him that one thing you should never expect from me is bed tea. Okay? I don't function till I get my shot in the morning. So that's your responsibility from day one. So he would, of course, he cut the whole process down and made me drink black coffee instead. You didn't have dips in those days, right? So it was a little bit of an exercise. So instead he said, black coffee is the in thing. You should be having black coffee. What he got me addicted to. Of course, nowadays I don't drink black coffee because I don't think it's good for me. I prefer the green tea, which is a really, really toned down version. But today also, it's dips only. So not too much of a trouble. But having said that, I think what he brought to the partnership was sheer common sense. He knows that I obsess about things. For instance, as I told you all, when in Kharagpur, I was, in charge of the cash as well as the lockers and things like that. I had 7 bunches of keys. And at the end of the day, I would deposit all of those 7 bunches in my hand safe. And then I would close my hand safe securely and carry that key back home, only one key back home. And there was this day, when I suddenly felt that I had not closed the hand safe properly, which meant all the keys were available for whoever.
Oh my God.
When you do things regularly, you forget whether you have done it. When you're doing it deliberately or mindful about what you're doing, you remember. When you do it unmindfully because it has become part of your routine, you sometimes forget. And that was exactly what had happened. I couldn't remember, locking the safe and testing the handle, which I normally used to do. And I was getting so hyper about it, So over dinner, I started sort of ventilating about it, and it went on. And then, we went to bed. I couldn't sleep. And then in the middle of the night, I woke him up and told him that you've got to take me to the branch. We had a scooter then. So I said, you take me on the scooter to the branch. I want to check. So he said, that's the last thing I'm going to do. And he turned over and fell asleep again. So, I tried again. Again, he would just, swat away my hand and go back to sleep. So I really felt, absolutely that this guy doesn't support me at all. He doesn't understand my worries. And I literally saw the dawn come on in front of my eyes. Okay. And then in the morning, he woke up and he gave me coffee. And I said, why were you being so mean to me? He said, look, it's very simple. If something has gone wrong, you need someone on the outside to bail you out. If I had taken you in the middle of the night, both of us would be behind bars. Who would be there to bail you out? So stop. You go and check what has happened, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. So, he has that very pure, what I say, common sense. And I was just sharing with somebody that being a public sector banker, I don't drive a very expensive car. Okay. But now that I'm in the IT sector, I can afford to drive expensive cars. I can afford it now. But when I was thinking of replacing one of them with a high-end car, he just, sort of smiled and said, remember, if you're getting out of such a car, you must also have equivalent shoes and bags. Because he knows I love wearing old shoes because they're so comfy. Change bags, because if I change bags, I invariably forget something that's useful. And something which I've not used for 6 months, with the new bag, I'll need it just that very day. So I hate changing bags and shoes. He knows that. And he said, take care, what you're doing. Because you can't go around coming out of an expensive car in the kind of, accessories that you use. So, He has this way of sort of grounding me very quickly. And I appreciate that because I think, he brings a sense of balance into whatever we are doing. And, it gives me ultimately a lot of comfort because I think that support is very essential for us.
That's a beautiful, partnership. Actually, we have to spend more time together just talking. My husband said the same thing when I was leaving RBI and joining the private sector. He said, "You can do exactly what you want with your money, but remember, our children are also my children, and he's a professor and he's the pure jholawala, and so there is a certain set of values that we want this house to have, and it was such a wonderful thing, like you said, it grounds you, it helps you see things in perspective. It also gives you the confidence that you're not dependent on these things, right? Like everything that comes to you with that tag and with that job is not something that should hold you back, because there are other things in life. So and I think that's wonderful. Although, let me tell you, if you were to buy any car that you wanted and you get out of those with your old shoes, you would still carry it off and there would be no problem. So I want to, there is a lot of questions here that I have to ask you, but my last question, you talked about public sector versus private sector. Again, just tell us a little bit more. I know that there are a lot of myths on both sides to be busted, but just a short summary.
One, of course, is, this myth that public sector people don't work. 100% myth. I worked in the public sector for 40 long years, and at least in the last 4 years, never went to bed before 1 in the night, and sometimes was up at 3 in the morning as well. And even in other times, even in my earlier days, like really speaking, when I first went to Kharagpur and I took over the job of an accountant, and I was also managing the household at that point of time, I used to feel like a laborer in Siberia, probably. Because, I was working all the time, whether it be at home, at the office. Of course, over a period of time, I learned to be more smart about it. I trained a lady to become our cook and look after all of that herself. And she became such a good cook that she became the general cook in the mohalla that she used to stay in. So all festivities and everything, she used to be the one who would do the cooking. But the fact is, all of us work extremely hard. Now, again, all of us doesn't mean all. Yes, it is true that even if you don't work very hard in the public sector banks, you can't be thrown out. But you won't make a success of your career either. Then you are accepting a life of mediocrity. Okay? Success comes only with hard work. And hard work, whether it is public or the private, it doesn't make a difference. People who are successful in the public sector have come up the hard way. They've worked really, really hard in order to get where they have worked. The second thing is, I used to believe in the private sector, people were only interested about money, not so much about promotion and career. And that in the public sector, because you didn't have money, career or promotions were all they bothered about. Absolutely untrue. No matter how much money you give in the private sector, they still want the promotion. That is still very much a part of what they want. However, having said that, I must say that what is different, basically different, is the way, the agility with which people can respond. Because in the private sector, the processes are very much curtailed. In the sense that, we have to always remember that there are agencies that are looking at us, and therefore process is very important. If you just look at SBI, the number of people we have to answer RTI queries, it would be enough to staff a small bank. Okay? The RTI queries take up that much of your time, and you are bound by law to actually answer that. When in Bangalore, we had a gentleman who had registered his email address with his name at .rti@gmail.com. That was his name. And his job was every other day to go into a branch, read the name badges of our people, and then send in 12 queries a day regarding what's the travel bill of this person, what's the medical bill of this person, what's the kind of leave that he has taken. Those were RTI queries. There was one whole day where, there were 54 of his cases that were coming up before the CCI. 54 cases. And I was there answering all of those questions. And at the end of it all, I told the Chief Information Commissioner, the CIC, I told him that, sir, can you not understand that this person is merely harassing us? please, you have to pass the right kind of, stricture, because otherwise this is a law which is actually meant to serve the people. It's being hijacked by people who are abusing it. And if you allow such abuse, the law itself will go. And that's not what you want to do, because yes, it serves a purpose. Let it serve its purpose. Let it not be hijacked by people who are abusing it. But that is the kind of thing that you have to go through in the public sector. The private sector is not bothered about these things. They can do what they like. So, these are very many, small differences, but, very material differences that come across. Also, I would say, in respect of the private sector, there is far better understanding and appreciation of its employees, because, the employees are there on account of choice, and they have many other opportunities. So you have to be very, very careful about how you partner them so as to bring the personal and the organizational goals together. In the private sector, we don't really bother so much because the attrition levels are low. People who have come in there have made a choice of being safe rather than, having to face the difficulties that you would face because your job is always on the line. In the public sector, unless you do something wrong, unless you have your hand in the till, you're not going to get thrown out. So the incentives are less, the disincentives are also less. So therefore, there is a difference in the level of work. But not for people, not for all people. You can't paint everybody with the same brush. There are some very, very hard workers there. They set their own goals, they set their own motivations. Also in the public sector, what we do is, we know that we can't throw out a person just because that person is not achieving. So we try and find a position in which the person can achieve. We try and hit the buttons beyond the pure, monetary incentivization to get them to work. So, you have to balance a number of things. These are skills that you learn over there because you can't hire and fire. Whereas in the private sector, this is far more easier. If you're not doing your well, you put them on a PIP, which is a performance improvement plan. That doesn't work. You can ask them to leave. Much easier. So yes, there are differences. There are things that you can learn from the public as well as from the private sector. Both have their strengths, but both have their weaknesses as well.
Sure. And I think that's what makes you a well-rounded leader, if you begin to understand that organizations have their own, benefits and constraints. And then there are individuals, right? Because the same individuals perform differently in the different contexts. I have a lot of questions and I'm going to start asking them because I'll never get rid of my questions. I probably need a separate session with you sometime to ask my questions. So there's a question from Dheera Deshmukh. I know that Amy told me that there are 5 of these questions get an award, get a Tata Click voucher. So the first question I'm going to ask you is from Dheera Deshmukh. Have the challenges for women at work changed in the past decade, and what changes do you see going ahead? How can you be prepared today's youth of all genders for these changes?
So yes, the challenges definitely have changed. They have changed because society has learned to accept that women will be in very unconventional roles. And you can see them, even for that matter, the other day I saw a lift woman. I had never seen a lift woman earlier, but even they're operating lifts. Forget about lifts, they're operating trucks, they're operating tractors. So yes, we are seeing people in very, very unconventional roles and roles that we had never thought of. Just recently, I read about a woman who's actually exploring, looking at the space, working about launching satellites and stuff like that, something that is really, really high end. So definitely, society has changed. They've begun to think in different ways. Where it has not changed, I think, is the concept that the woman is still the primary caregiver. I think at least in India, that has not changed much. It's still there. I'm hoping with the new generations, it will change because I see a lot of our young, employees actually enjoying paternity leave and looking forward towards it, supporting their spouses much more in their difficult times. And to that extent, I think, these are things that are happening and they will happen. They will happen. They are bound to happen. And I see them as being far more supportive. And in fact, today morning, we were having a company event and my sales leader was, he's a man, by the way, and he was just sharing that about 5 years back, when he was having a game of poker on one of these Friday nights with his friends, and one of his friends was moaning and groaning about losing all the time, and he turned around and told him that for heaven's sake, stop crying like a girl. And his 11-year-old daughter was passing by, and she turned around and told her father, what do you mean? How can you even say that? So, even children these days are becoming far more conscious, and they are creating the consciousness in us that we have these unconscious biases, that crying is a girl's job, boys don't cry. That's not correct, because, it is correct to be able to, express your emotions. It can be a boy or a girl, how does it matter? And it can be in any place. So, these are stereotypes which we need to break, which we are breaking, but I think we still have a long way to go. As for the younger generation, one thing only that I would like to leave people with is that they are going to face a far more uncertain world that we have faced. Far more uncertain in many, many ways. And therefore, they have to be far more nimble on their feet than we were. So, for them, learning is something that's going to be lifelong. They can't stop learning. Learning may not always happen through your technical courses or through your, through the formal channels. Learning has to be from environment. Learning has to be from your friends, colleagues, spouses, from your families. And the thing is, basically, you should try and absorb life lessons as you go along, so that you are far more prepared for the future than probably, we would have imagined ourselves to be. But it is something that needs to be cultivated as a way of life, that is unlearning what you already knew, changing your attitudes, reinventing yourself so that you fit into the new roles that are required for the changing environment.
Very true, because what you know will become obsolete for sure in the future, but how you learn will not become obsolete, because at the end of the day, we are humans, and that's how much we know. There's a question from Shreya M. What is the image? I like this question. What is the image of women bosses today? Please tell us as a person from within an organization. Yeah, I have a term for that, but you tell us first.
Tell me the term that you have. Frankly speaking, I don't know that women bosses, when they come in, there are a lot of skeptics. There are a lot of skeptics whether she'll be able to do it. A lot of people, when I became chairman, said, Abhi to thoda danda dikhao. And I have never shown the danda, and I didn't know how to do it. So I told them, boss, that's not something I can do. I'll continue in my own way, and I'll hope to convince people. I think, it's a question of how seriously you take yourself. Being a boss doesn't mean that you really have to boss people around. Being a boss means you enable others to succeed. You can't succeed all on your own. You enable others to succeed, and that means also that you're a good listener, that you're willing to be convinced by others. In fact, I was just reading something of the leader of Netscape. He said that if there's data, let's look at it. And if there's only opinion, then let's go with mine. But here again, I would say, I don't want everybody to say that only my opinion matters. Their opinion also must matter. But when you are leading a team, you give them a fair opportunity to convince you. You must also remember to have an open mind to be convinced. If they convince you, you change course. If they don't, then the better toe the line that you have decided. So, it was a very open thing for us, and I made this very clear right in the beginning. Either you convince me or I convince you, and then there is no dissension. Then we all pull as a team, whichever direction we mean to go. And I will have an open mind. And I have actually changed direction at various times in order to do that. I have an open mind when people are telling me. Try to keep that open mind. Try to ensure that everybody has a voice. Because if you're shutting off some voices by snapping at them or just being a boss, then you're actually shutting off that brain power, which actually will come in very handy to you. You have one brain in 2 hands and 24 hours. How much can you achieve? You've got to rely on people in order to achieve far more than, your narrow ambit will allow you. And frankly speaking, anybody's success ultimately reflects into your success. If you have got that in your mind, you don't mind others succeeding. You don't allow others to fail. Their failure also reflects onto you. So, it's up to you to ensure that, all of the team succeeds. As they succeed, you will automatically get the lauded spirit.
Very fair. And in fact, as you become a more and more senior leader, then that's the only way that you actually can grow. The phrase I have learned in my life is that when you start with a new set of people, you're always the wimp. Because you're a listener, typically, like I am, I think you are, and you just said that. So you listen, you allow other people to speak, you sort of try and build consensus. You're the wimp all of that time. Then there's that one day when you say, okay, now I've understood, this is what we are going to do. That day you're the vamp. So you move from being the wimp to the vamp. And you have to remember that none of them is going to matter once people are with you on the task, because the task is always bigger than you. So, or the team. Like typically, if you set yourself ambitious goals, then that takes care of it, which I think in your book, and we didn't talk a lot about SBI because that's a separate conversation altogether. But I think a lot of your career is about making that goal so much bigger and that ambition so much bigger than the set of people that you're working with, that those dissensions you are able to sort of get over and have people moving. So Isha, whoever asked this question, Shreya, I think you have to focus on that, and that I think not really bother about the labels, because labels will come and go. Let's just have fun with the labels. There's another person, Isha Dhawan, and she's asking, what do you think Indian women need to do to be able to make their mark in the workforce? I think a lot of it you've spoken already, but if there's an answer you want to give for this, I have like 5 more questions. Oh my God, I have more. Okay.
Questions, I think time won't.
You don't have time? Okay.
Yeah. But,
so let me just read the questions and come back with the ones that are relevant. What do you need to do more? I think ma'am already talked about learning and leading. In a male-dominated financial arena that you have spent many years of your life, did you feel that you had to be more like men? This is a good question. I'm sure you'd like to answer. More like men than think like a woman is a question from Priya.
No, I don't think you have to be more like men. You can be exactly what you are and you can still do it. It's not a question of trying to act manly. It's a question of trying to act as a true leader would. And that is genderless. There is no gender to that. So sure. You don't have to conform to men. I have always worn a sari wherever I've gone, excepting in very cold weather when a sari is uncomfortable, because this is a attire for, for the tropicals. And very thoughtfully thought of attire, because yes, in a tropical country it works. But the fact is that, you don't have to conform to any of those stereotypes. You create your own style, you create your own stereotype. That's perfectly acceptable. As long as there is delivery, nobody really bothers. All of that is peripheral to what you are actually doing. So that's the main thing. Just, ensure that, whatever you're doing, you're being supportive, you're being a team player. You're not trying to sort of, put people down at the expense of trying to make yourself look bigger. And if you do all of that, then automatically this happens. And as for your learning, like you were saying, Shinjini, my father used to say, when you get into a new team, be like a cockroach, pretend that you're dead. You just and absorb as much as you can. Be like a sponge, keep absorbing whenever you. And then, when you do come alive, then you can speed around. But then just pretend that you are not there. Let
That's
them
true.
What you need to say, because that is where you will pick up the best things.
That is true. I'll just ask you a couple more quick questions. There's one from Utkarsh Menon. In retrospect, what would you do differently in your work life? I think that's a good question.
Well, when I really began my work life, there was not too much of a choice. Okay, if I wanted to just, get a career, it had to be either the IAS or the bank. Okay. And of course, if I could afford to study medicine or something else, maybe it would have been different. I was very interested in, the biological sciences. But very early on, my first ambition was, in fact, to be a biochemist. But then I found that I hated organic chemistry. At that time, I sort of blamed my teacher, but later on, I realized that it was myself as well. And therefore, that was a no-no. But yes, I could have pursued a career in medicine, which again was difficult on account of family finances. So, then when I wanted to try for the IAS, I found that you needed knowledge up to postgraduate level of any one subject, which was not a language. And unfortunately, I had chosen a language. So I'd have to spend a year or two preparing for it, and I didn't have a year or two. So banking became a default choice. And now, if I didn't have to become a default choice, in fact, this was a question that was posed to me, I think, during the DMD interviews. One of the management experts asked me that if you weren't a banker, what would you do? And I told him I'd be a museologist. And that was a great answer, I thought, because it really threw him. He didn't even know what a museologist was. So I sort of explained, a museologist is one who looks after museums. I'm very interested in old artifacts and things like that. And, there were no questions beyond that. So, that sort of... Yes, there are so many multiple things that I may have thought of if the opportunities that are present today were available then. But having said that, I still am very satisfied with my career as a banker and now in the IT sector. I think I have had a lot of good moments, some bad moments surely, but a lot of good moments and a set of wonderful colleagues, actually, who have been supportive throughout my life. Even now, my colleagues support me whenever there is a need. And I cannot but be very thankful for what I have been able to do.
And for all the other answers, you have to read the book. It is a beautiful book. You talk about museology. I thought that whole episode of the, the Cartier, Sotheby's, I don't know, one of the Christie's, your New York description of Christie's was very nice. Marina, just one last little question that somebody asked, which I liked, Sonal Shah. How do you deal with stress?
You've got to find
what do you do?
With stress, stress is something you start doing something that you enjoy doing. I find diving into a book the easiest way to deal with stress. Others may find other ways. Some like singing, some like watching TV. Oh, by the way, one of the things that I find really busts your stress is if you watch one of the inane serials that are on TV. They really make you laugh because there's nothing as good as an inane serial to make you wonder what the hell are these people, where are they coming from? It's stress. So I think you find the right way of doing it. And that's why I have 4 or 5 books at the same time that I read, because some are light, some are more, serious, and depends upon the mood in which I am in, and I pick up the right one for that. But that's my way. And of course, the other thing, of course, is to get together with friends and then just do a little bit of, gossiping, as I say. That also is a very stress buster, and girlfriends are the best for that kind of a thing. They really and truly understand where you're coming from. And getting away from everything and just going out with your girlfriends for a while, that's a great stress buster, actually.
Super. And so wonderful to talk to you. And I have many more questions, and we will talk about it later some other time. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shinjini, for being in conversation with Ms. Bhattacharya. It was such an interesting and such a candid conversation, Ms. Bhattacharya. Thank you for writing this book. It's really, I think, really very, very much needed for a lot of us women who are actually struggling, trying to cope with so many together. But here we find you as a role model and all set to follow that path. So thank you so much for that very candid conversation. And very optimistic, because not only inspiring, but optimistic, because we can see that there is a future out there that we can all hope for. So thank you once again. And while I'm at it, all our lovely, interesting questions that have come from Utkarsh, Dheera, Shreya, Emma, Sonal, Priya, do write in to info@littlelife.in. We will send you your vouchers. Till then, thank you once again very much from Tata Literature Live, Business Shastras. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thank you for having Shinjini in conversation with me. She's written one of the most beautiful reviews. That itself is worth reading. The review, she writes, we should come
from the heart.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And happy to Women's International Day for all of you. Bye.
Yes, to you too. Bye-bye.